Thank you, Rochelle. Hello, everyone. I'm Mandana Khalili, Professor of Medicine and Director of the UCSF Research Coordinating Center's Investigator Development Unit of the NIMHD-sponsored Health Equity Action Network. I'd like to welcome you to our monthly training webinar. Before we start, we'd like to acknowledge the Ramaytush Ohlone people who are the traditional custodians of this land. We pay our respects to the Ramaytush Ohlone elders, past, present, and future, who call this place the land that UCSF sits upon, their home. We are proud to continue their tradition of coming together and growing as a community. We thank the Ramaytush Ohlone community for their stewardship and support, and we look forward to strengthening our ties as we continue our relationship of mutual respect and understanding. Wonderful. Today we are honored to have Dr. Leticia Márquez-Magaña speak to us on intellectual safety for transformative science. Dr. Magaña was the first generation to college in her family. At Stanford University, she earned biological sciences degrees before becoming the first and only Latina to earn a biochemistry PhD at UC Berkeley. Following postdoctoral training at Stanford, she was an affirmative action hire in biology at San Francisco State University. And ever since, she's focused on giving back to minoritized communities throughout her impressive career as an impactful biomedical researcher. Indeed, in her role as the director of the Health Equity Research Laboratory, Dr. Márquez-Magaña works collaboratively with lab personnel and research projects aimed towards linking basic science to community health. This work is informed by her affiliation with the Health Equity Institute at San Francisco State University and her leadership role as the principal investigator and core leader of the San Francisco Building Infrastructure Leading to Diversity, or SF-Build for short. During this presentation, please don't hesitate to ask questions through the chat function. We will definitely be able to address them at the end of the presentation. And of course, at the end of the presentation, the opportunity is also there for ask questions in person. Dr. Márquez-Magaña, welcome, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. And I'm going to go ahead and get started. Can everyone see the screen? Just somebody nod head. Okay, great.
Yes. And maybe go to presenter view.
Yeah, it's funny because what you'll see is on this slide, it says I'm using this view because it guides me and it doesn't stick.
Oh, so perfect.
Yeah, because when I teach, it's so much easier to go back and forth. So I apologize, but if you focus on the middle, you'll get used to it. You'll see.
It's fine.
Thank you, Rochelle. Okay, so I'll be giving today's presentation on intellectual safety for transformative science. And these are the learning objectives that were already sent out. So by the end of the talk, participants, working with you, will be able to identify some psychosocial threats that trigger anxiety, underperformance, and imposter syndrome, provide some examples of coping strategies, and then just, in one slide, talk about the value of minoritized researchers to innovative, rigorous, and transformative science. And so I'm trying to mush it together, but give it enough room to breathe so that we can all really engage with the material. And so with the brief notes, some of this information can lead to discomfort. But one of the students told me, you only know that you're making change when people are uncomfortable, because keeping status quo makes people comfortable. So this is a quote actually from someone at the Museum of the African American History and Culture at Washington that talks about the importance of actually seeking discomfort to shift ways of thinking. With respect to microaggressions, because we'll be talking a little bit about microaggressions because they are a threat to our intellectual safety, I'll be focusing more on the microaffirmations, which is on the next line, because in this article, it talks about the fact that from a neuroscience kind of perspective, if you're focused on not doing something, that's exactly what you'll do. And so focus on the microaffirmation part of it. When I give this workshop in person, I often say to the folks as I do this, don't look at the back wall. don't turn around, don't look at the back wall. And I can see them fidgeting in their seats. They all want to look at the back wall. So again, don't think about not doing a microaggression, think about doing a microaffirmation, which I'll be making more clear as we go through this presentation. Okay, in terms of, it's a very interactive workshop. And so the first slide, I need I would ask for someone to please read this aloud. So unmute and either raise your hand or just unmute and start reading. Kelly Taylor, raise your hand. Go, Kelly.
You want me to read the whole slide or just the first paragraph?
The whole slide.
Okay. You're attending a conference for early stage investigators launching into biomedical research careers. The opening panel includes an NIH program officer and your friend from grad school. She was a rock star in grad school and was invited to the panel because
that's bad. Yeah.
because of her great success as a new professor. She's the only female on the panel and is pregnant. You witnessed the PO describe growth mindset as a determinant of research success. In fact, he shares an Albert Einstein quote, "It's not that I'm so smart, it's just that I stay with problems longer." The PO then ends with his own view on Einstein's quote, "So innovative science takes time, but time is hard to come by in a world where we all want it. Kids, family, work-life balance." Your friend is the next speaker on the panel. She appears anxious and uncharacteristically stutters through her presentation.
Thank you, Kelly. So absorb the case here, the kid, and what I'm going to be doing next is putting y'all into breakout rooms. Although, let me see if it might be, let me see. Yeah, I can do the breakout rooms. So you'll be in a room with about 2 or 3 other individuals because we have, and let me see. So I'm going to create them really quick and assign automatically. Okay, so you'll be in the room with 3 to 4 other individuals. And what I want you to do is to answer this question. What is going on? And are you surprised that your rockstar friend stuttered through the presentation? Okay. So again, the scenario is that it's one of these conferences, we've all gone to, and this one's particularly for early science investigators like yourselves. And the PO, who is the panel leader, shares this information. And then your friend experiences some anxiety and stutters. And what do you think is going on? So go ahead and go into the rooms. I'll be giving you 5 minutes, and then come back, and the one that got up the earliest will report out.
I think we determined that Roa was kindly going to speak on our behalf.
Okay, thank you, Roa.
Yeah. Should I go?
Go ahead.
Okay, so we had a number of factors that we actually thought of based on the vignette. There could be, there's also, she's the only female, maybe she felt some kind of, a feeling about this, or also like there's like the like her ranking too, like there's some like, power dynamic. It could be also some kind of maybe performance and anxiety as well, or there's always expectation of her excelling and doing really good. There's an element, it could be of maybe some microaggression. There's some like comments that were made. So yeah, these are like mainly the factor that we actually thought of.
Thank you, Roa, and thank you for the alternate hypotheses. And so when I'm going to go to room 2, which is Alyssa, Sheena, and Octavia, and then please share any new information, or if it's exactly what Roa said, just say ditto. Does that make sense? Okay, so who is Alyssa, Sheena, or Octavia?
I can do it for our group. I think we talked about many of the same things, so ditto. But we also talked about if you would say something in the moment, like in response, having heard that type of comment and seeing that your friend is nervous and anxious. And we were just talking about like how difficult it is. and trying to figure out the best approach to addressing a type of comment like this and something that makes somebody uncomfortable. But we didn't come up with any solutions quite,
Right.
and then we got cut off. So that's what we were talking about, though.
Thank you, Alyssa. That's super helpful. And we will get to some possible solutions. Okay. And then room through is Marisol, Mona, or Natasha. And again, ditto or add any new information.
Yeah, I can share for our group. Sorry, I was coughing. Yeah, I think, ditto on a lot of things that have already been said. I think, it's hard because I think your awareness when you are pregnant, you have a heightened awareness of, this situation and sort of what she might be going through, because there's really no male equivalent of pregnancy, right? Like we think about sabbatical and like that's across the board. And sabbatical can definitely, affect research and innovation and productivity. But like we would never have to report it in the same way a pregnancy is reported. And we sort of, I shared a little bit of personal, sort of discomfort that I've had in writing a K award. And so my mentors had suggested, putting into my K application my reduced productivity because I was pregnant last year, and I'm still struggling with it. I don't know which way I'm gonna go, but yeah, this definitely spoke to me personally.
Thank you, Natasha, and thank you for being vulnerable. And it is very difficult. And just like anything else in any proposal, it's the subjectivity of the reviewers. Some of them would rather have you talk about it as a deficiency. You weren't, and some of them would rather talk about it as an asset. Now you have a better perspective. Now you have the ability to multitask, so it's hard. Okay, room 4, Edwin, Kelly, or Tim, who, either say ditto or anything new, any new information.
Absolutely ditto. I mean, we were talking about, this is an unforced error, on the PO side. Women, it's a gendered comment. Women are particularly singled out for the work-life balance and the family issues. There was, that line about we want it all, the kids, family, work life, particularly singled her out. And so it's that was an error. It's a gendered critique that women are really sensitive to. So this was not surprising that it threw somebody off their game. And we had similar discussions about the talk of work-life balance, but yet the respect for that still really isn't there, and there's still a very gendered thing. So then yeah, this was an avoidable situation that lands on the PO.
Yes, thank you, Edwin. And I'm sure it was unintentional, right? I mean, I think the PO took time to come to this conference to support the early stage investigators, and you agree. I agree with you. It's an unforced error. It was something that was meant to maybe inspire, but yeah, it missed the mark. Okay, just to say out loud, this actually happened at a RISE meeting I attended. It wasn't the panel, but the PO actually said this thing and had a slide, and I was sitting down the table from a pregnant woman, and she visibly was upset, so but at the same time, in the break, there was a lot of men who were upset because they also want work-life balance. So this cuts across a lot of things. Okay, so you talked about that, and so what I want to talk about was the underperformance, the fact that she doesn't, in your experience, she never stuttered before, she never stuttered when you saw her, she was a rock star. What could have triggered it? So one of the learning objectives was to talk about imposter syndrome, and imposter syndrome has been largely codified by Valerie Young. when she talks about it as a condition of feeling anxious and not experiencing success internally, despite being high performing in terms of all the data. You have lots of papers, this individual was a rock star, but the triggering messaging was activated some of the internalized ideas that come from social messaging. So I think for many of us, and having had 2 kids, when I was pregnant, it was somehow I wasn't supposed to be pregnant and a scientist. That somehow they didn't go together, and yet they did. I was at Stanford. I was a postdoc. I had I was pregnant. It was really hot there, and I would go into the cold rooms to get to cool down. But anyway, it does go together, but it does affect your performance when you have the anxiety about, well, will Heather's see me? Okay. So the thing that's the I always focus on is just, with respect to imposter syndrome, is that it only happens to individuals who actually are high performing, who have the data that they're really good, right? Because you are really good. That's why when you're feeling that you're not, that's the imposter part. If you're not so good, you don't feel you're good, then that's not imposter syndrome. It's an alignment. Does that make sense? Anyway, for me, when I figured that out, it helped a lot, because then I'm just like, oh, it's social messaging. Okay. What I'm more comfortable with is, because this is internalized, stereotype threat is also internalized, but it's definitely more of a focus on outside stressors. And so Claude Steele is the individual that codified this, and I will have some activities around this. So stereotype threat is a situational phenomenon that gets triggered when individuals who are targets of negative stereotypes, and I'll go through that a little bit, underperform because of a conscious or unconscious worry or fear that they're going to be evaluated by those negative stereotypes. And similarly, as in the last slide, it only occurs for high achievers in high stakes situations. Okay. So for example, if you don't care about math and math's not your thing and math is not necessary for your career, regardless of whether you're in a threat situation or not, you're just going to do the same in math. Okay. So what is happening? Claude Steele actually talks about, the snake in the house. Okay. And I find that is a really useful way to talk about it in a story way. So, for example, in this case, the stereotype threat could be seen as you're coming home to write a grant proposal, and you're a young investigator, you're still sharing a house with other individuals, and you're coming in, and as you come in, your housemate leaves and says, I think there's a snake in the living room. I hear some hissing sounds. Okay, well, if you don't care about snakes, okay, it's not going to mess with you at all. But if you're scared and you're worried about the snake, what's going to happen? You're going to have some physiological stress. You're going to have some cortisol production, and you'll probably be in the room just hypervigilant. Did I hear that? Or it's the uncertainty. It's the contextual ambiguity, and both of those things come together to diminish your working memory, and then you underperform. Okay, say you go in there and you recognize that your housemate has left a plastic snake. What happens? You're like, I'm mad at my housemate. I'll get them later. But the cortisol goes away, the hypervigilance goes away, and you're fine. Okay. So in the situation with the program officer, the reason it's confusing is because it's very ambiguous and you don't know exactly what's going on. But if the PO had stopped and said, oh, wait, my work-life balance somehow, and work-life balance is important to all of us, right? And we need to find a way at the societal level to value that for all individuals, right? Then that would have been the plastic snake. If they had followed up, and therefore, all women who have babies should not get funded. That's a poisonous snake. That's like, and that's not cortisol, that's adrenaline. Them's fighting words. And so, and in fact, adrenaline can boost your performance in certain ways. And the hypervigilance goes away in that you just get out of there, right? So if it was a real snake in the house, you would probably call whoever comes and picks up poisonous snakes, and you would get out of there and go work someplace else. So the worst thing is the ambiguity. It's where you don't know if it's actually there or not. Does that make sense to folks? Okay, that's why these intellectual threats are so pernicious. There's many triggers of stereotype threat, and one of them is the collective threat. And so that's then there's, there's actually examples. And this is a woman who is pregnant. And the idea is that you worry that your behavior, the fact that you're pregnant, the fact that maybe you have to go into the cold room because you're getting really hot and you have to leave the gel running on the bench, which is my situation, that somehow that's going to reflect poorly on other females, right? And it's going to reflect poorly on others who are pregnant. So you have the additional weight of like my behavior now is affecting the way behave, the perceptions of others. And that's it's a load. It's labor, emotional labor, psychological labor. And so it affects your performance. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is explore a little bit the literature. And Rochelle's going to help me hopefully with launching the poll. And so what I'm going to do is go first to the pioneering study that was done by Steele and Aronson at Stanford. In fact, during this time, I was a postdoc there. So when I read this the first time, I was like, oh, that's really cool. So what we're going to be doing is I'm going to describe the data, and then I'm going to ask you to choose to predict what the data looks like underneath here. Okay, so what this is a bar graph of a non-threat situation, and then the threat situation is covered up, and then I'm going to ask you what you think is happening. So first of all, what you can see is that this is quote unquote Black subjects and white subjects. This is in 1995. We all know now that we don't talk about human participants as subjects. Okay, because bad. Anyway, so these are Black participants and white participants. Okay, and in the non-threat situation, they matched the students, SAT scores, majors, year major, the year that they're in school. And they said, this test is designed to understand the psychological factors involved in solving verbal problems. And then they gave them something that was like an SAT test for verbal aptitude. And what you can see, which you would expect from Stanford students, is that there's no statistically significant difference in performance, right? That's what I would have expected. I was there as an undergrad, I was there as a postdoc. That's what I would have expected. Okay. The only difference now is in the same room, matched comparison groups, or matched Black and white participants. And someone comes in, and instead of saying what's on the right-hand side, they say, this is a genuine test of your verbal abilities and limitations to get a better understanding of both. Okay. So what do you think the data looks like underneath here? And I'm going to ask Rochelle to launch the poll if she can. There she goes. And what you see is the responses there. Both the Black and white students perform the same. Go ahead and I don't have to read it. You all can read, but go ahead and choose what you think. As people are launching, let's see, both Black and white students. Here we go. Okay, I see one response so far. Here we go. Okay, thank you. Okay, we have all the responses in, and I'm not going to show them to you. Oh, wait, until we talk about them a bit. So what I see is that the two answers that were given is D, let me move this out of the way, that only the Black students perform worse when the test is described as a real test of verbal ability, and B, both Black and white students perform worse. For someone who chose B, can you please unmic and say why you chose both Black and white students perform worse? Because that's the response that got the least number of endorsement. Okay, who's going to unmic and say why they chose B? Lean into the discomfort. Okay, there were. I don't have the results to share. Oh wait, I can. Let's see.
I tried to relaunch the poll because I thought somebody still needed to answer, and now it doesn't let me go back to the first one that everyone did respond to. So I know the responses if you want me to share them.
No, that's okay.
Okay.
It's just really to get folks thinking about it, but whoever remembers that they selected B, let me know why you selected B.
People either responded B or D, and more
Exactly.
responded D than B.
Exactly. So it's interesting because as scientists, you know that we all, make our predictions and then we justify them based on our rationale. So we're used to doing this kind of stuff. So why did folks predict B?
Letty, I'm going to just speak because I'm not 100% sure which I ended up landing on, because I think I was debating, is it D or B? And I think I pressed one as it went through quickly. But I can just share the rationale for having thought B as a possibility, in that I thought that with any sort of a threat, as in, reality of what's going to happen, that individuals who potentially feel or expect, sort of underperformance in those areas, or don't have the confidence in those areas, would naturally kind of, do worse. And I would expect that those who feel it even more and would do even worse. So that's why I was sort of, debating between D and B.
Thank you. And so what we see is that in fact it's D, and it's statistically significant. So what you can see is that the Black participants underperform in the threat situation. And in fact, what you see is that for the white participants, it's a little higher than in the non-threat. That's not statistically significant. Nonetheless, meta-analysis have shown that in high stakes, environments with, high achieving individuals, there is a lift on standardized tests for whites and Asians. Okay. So there's a positive stereotype, right? In terms of, so when individuals, for example, when I tell folks how to maybe mitigate some of this is if you're an Asian woman, for example, if you remember that you're Asian, you do better on math, but if you remember you're a woman, you do worse. So go with the identity that is positive in that domain. Does that make sense? So in terms of math, for example, I'm a descendant of the Azteca. The Azteca are the premier applied mathematicians. I didn't know this when I was going to school here as a youngster, because we didn't talk about the Aztecas very much. But later on in my growth as a scholar of the world, I'm like, wow, I should be really good in math. And I have two first cousins who independently in Zacatecas, a state in Mexico, were the top mathematicians. And that's what they told me. They said, of course, we're going to be awesome because we're the descendants of the Azteca. Okay. So this is a trigger, the article talks about is it's stigmatized subject matter. So in particular domains, what we're told is that certain individuals are stereotyped as being good in that and others are not. So I just gave the example of math. When I've given this workshop at UCSF, men who are in the nursing program have talked about the fact that they're stereotyped as not being nurturing. And so that affects their performance, and that, it happens on a daily basis when they walk into the patient's room. And certainly, I think, folks who are white, and I've talked to individuals, especially in the last few years, they're constantly worried about being in a social environment of being considered a racist. And so when there's talk about racism and anti-racism, all that, their stuttering happens, the sweating happens. Okay. So the thing about stereotypes are it's situational and it really depends on what's going on. So in the environment. Now we're going to do another one. And I think we have enough time. So we're going to be at the same poll. And this is you can see these are old studies. They have to be redone. But in this case, they were looking at, so the other one was Stanford. This is Brown University. So both private universities, the studies were done. And in one case, there's females in the minority. So, and then it's an all-female group. So I'm showing here performance on a test in a room where it's all women, and it's all women in math and in verbal. Okay. Then what happens when men come into the room and females become the minority in that situation? So I'm going to ask you to predict and recognize that, this is old because we don't have non-binary here. We don't have a lot of the other categories. And so I just, that it's historical. Okay, so here's the poll can get launched. And so the idea is, and this is a little more complicated. So what do you predict? That the females perform the same when there's men in the room, that they perform better, that they perform worse, that they perform better on the, worse on the same on the math test, but worse on the verbal, or worse in the math, but same on the verbal. Okay. And I see one response so far recorded. And we're at, okay, so we're at 25%, 50%, few more, I'll give it 30 more seconds. Okay. And that's 80% participation. And I'm going to go ahead and call it in 10 seconds. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll and say that I'm not going to share the results, but E was the response that was predicted by most individuals. There were some folks that suggested C or D. Does anybody want to share why they chose either C or D? Okay, in the interest of time, I'm just going to go ahead and go. In fact, what happens is that the females only underperform on the math test. And that has to do with the fact that females are stereotyped as not being as good in math as men. And there's a lot of social messaging that has happened. So we all saw the Barbie movie, but I don't know if anybody remembers that when Barbie came out at the very beginning, there was one that you would pull on her string and she would say, "Math is hard. Math is hard." That Barbie got pulled, but imagine all the little girls that played with that Barbie, right? And so with respect to verbal ability, I think that I've done this workshop many, many times. Most folks actually agree that females, when female, presenting, are considered better verbally. And so that's in the protected then from the stereotype threat. Okay, so in terms of this, what you can see is that there's the fact that when it's all females, things are good and they're all the same. And this is a study done with all white women. So there was no racial differences there. However, obviously the composition of the room changes the social context. So numerical underrepresentation is a trigger. So if you're the one and only, that definitely affects your performance. And what I use here is a statistic from UCLA, where in 2018, only one out of 500 graduates in the biology program, so this is post 209, post-affirmative action, only 1 out of 500 was a Black individual. And when I spoke to that person, they talked about on the daily experiencing microaggressions, on the daily experiencing, anyway, so it really affected their performance. In terms of, again, the ambient signaling, this is something that I share because it's an invalidating surrounding. So this is something that can be changed. You can change the surroundings so that there was an NPR report they called about the dude walls, right? I think many of us have walked by those walls where it's like everybody who doesn't look like you, and they're all the best. Anyway, so when I walked into the National Science Foundation in 2018 into their new building, this was the welcoming atrium. This was the welcoming. I did not feel welcome. And so what I saw is all men. I saw that they were all white men. I don't know that that's a fact. And when I asked the program officer who they were, she said that they were past program officers. That really upset me because the current program officer, past NSF directors, because at the time, the current director was Francis Cordova. And when I used to sit on the microbial genetics panel, I knew that the director was Rita Caldwell. In other words, to have all of these individuals, for whatever reason, you could still have had inclusive signaling by having the current director, and that could have gone a long ways to actually being welcoming. Okay, so I'm going to not talk about this so much because everyone experiences stereotype threat given on the domain. And then once you lift it, you can actually release better performance. So this is from a Yale study that was done by Professor Good, in which she showed that as a stereotype threat situation, females and males who were in third-year calculus performed equivalently. Then when the test was coded as not being gender biased, the females outperformed the males. The way I see that is that if you're in third semester calculus, you figured out how to cope with the threat. And then when the threat's gone, then you release your true ability. So what I want to do is release the true ability of everyone. Okay, so going back to this, I think folks did talk about maybe it was a microaggression, and I would agree with that. It was ambiguous. The context, you weren't clear. Why did this get brought up, especially when it is a gendered comment? And microaggressions, as you know, are commonplace. They're subtle. They happen often without intention, unintentionally. And so, for example, this individual says, I don't see colors. They see that as a microaggression. And it says hashtag I too am Harvard. When I've presented this to faculty, they'll say, oh, and that picture of the little girl when she said, I don't see color. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it says I too am Harvard. Do you not see that this is a Harvard co-ed? Again, microaggression, right? We don't see individuals for who they really are because we're formatted by stereotypes that society has put on us. Okay, so how can we change this to be innovative? To be innovative, to be affirming. And that's the root of the next part is the microaffirmations. And I recognize I have 15 minutes left and I will get through the slides, is whereas microaggressions are commonplace and they basically are verbal and nonverbal assaults, the key here is that they render you invisible or invalid. Okay. And I have seen, I think all of us have experienced being invisible or invalid in a particular environment because of this, what's being said, the signaling, that sort of thing. Microaffirmations, on the other hand, are acclamations or they wish you success. They render you visible and valid. This is a paper we published on operationalizing how to do them and a scale we created for measuring them. But I think the thing about microaffirmations is they were identified by Mary Rowe when at MIT she was asked as a consultant to look into an environment where there were individuals who were feeling othered, and what factors led them to have persistence. And what she found was that there was these commonplace verbal and nonverbal situations where folks were affirming that they wanted success for others. So here's a table that I've put together to give some illustrative examples. And then I'm going to ask you to come up with some examples at the individual, interpersonal, or institutional level with regard to the case study or the vignette that I presented at the beginning. So these examples actually come from hundreds of stereotype threat workshops that I've done, where I've asked individuals, what is an example of a verbal microaggression and what's an example of a nonverbal microaggression? And these come up a lot. So that's why I use them. So the example of the verbal is someone saying, you speak really good English for, and for an immigrant, for a Black person, for, in my case, Mexican, even though I'm Mexican-American. And so that's the verbal one. And then the nonverbal is being asked to partner, the instructor saying partner, choose a partner, and then the sole other person in the class not getting partnered with. I saw that so many times and I experienced it myself. So the thing is in a situation where nobody knows each other and you ask them to partner, the idea is that, somehow you're not, people are worried because of your stereotype of not being a good partner. Okay. So at the individual level, what the groups have come up with is if someone says you speak speak English really well, what you can do is tell yourself or as an avatar on your shoulder, but I also speak one or two other languages. That's microaffirming. Someone who's standing by, a bystander could say, wow, seeing that you're being microaggressed, wow, you speak 2 languages? That's awesome. I wish I could do that. And at the institutional level, and I see this more and more at UCSF, for example, is that bilingual candidate is preferred. That is an institutional affirmation. I grew up feeling that because I spoke 2 languages, I was somehow less than. And I always knew that that was problematic because speaking 2 languages is always, it's more than speaking 1. So I always knew it was problematic. Okay, but data has been used by many people to oppress, right? So anyway, okay, nonverbal. You're not being partnered with. Recognize it's not me, it's racism. They don't know me. They don't know how good I am. They don't know what a great partner I am, how smart I am. It's racism that's keeping them from partnering with somebody so awesome like myself. Bystander information, saying, going up to the individual who's being othered and say, hey, would you like to partner with me? And then at the institutional level, the professor can actually assign and rotate partners to take the piece out of it where someone is isolated. Okay, so in terms of the conference microaggression, for you with your friend, the rock star, experiencing anxiety, underperforming, stuttering because of a perceived, intellectual threat. So it's not clear that it was actually a microaggression or whatever. What would you? I could put you into breakout rooms to talk, but I recognize we're only 10 minutes away. So is there someone who can unmute and suggest a self-affirmation? What could your colleague on the panel have said to herself to combat that feeling?
I think that sometimes even being aware that some of your anxiety can be a function of stereotype threat, and that knowledge can be helpful. So maybe this person could have said, I'm feeling anxious, or I like reaffirm like what they've been able to do thus far, and understand that the anxiety that they're feeling is actually because they are and have always been in environments where they're essentially undermined. And so like being able to attribute that anxiety, not just that I'm just anxious, but actually that I'm in a situation in which I'm feeling anxious because I'm undermined in these ways, can be affirming.
Absolutely. And so, yeah, it's not me, it's that, whatever that other is, right? And absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. The other thing that, with any of these intellectual threats, it's the cortisol as opposed to the adrenaline. And so I have done that in so many situations, just taken a big, deep breath and let it out really slowly. And I can actually feel, so I'm talking, thank you. I didn't ask about the breathing, but that can also be done at the same time, is self-affirm and then just really breathe. As a bystander, and thank you for sharing that, Ebiati. I hope I said that correctly.
Very close.
Thank you. And then as a bystander, what could, if you were sitting next to your friend on the panel, what could you have said to her?
Letty.
What?
I just this whole thing is making me go back in time. I was part of the initial integration in my hometown of South Carolina when I was in the 4th grade.
Oh, yes.
And I went from an environment where people were, positive about you to one that wasn't, and how it affected me. And we're doing a documentary about it with the other kids who had similar experiences. And they are really messed up. We are all kind of messed up from that, what people did to us. And I'm talking to people my age, or some a little older, who are still affected about this. And when we talk about it, we go back to when we were that kid and we are messed up, and adults did some really bad things. And just to make you feel like that, because a lot of kids who were smart and could do things, they missed 1 or 2 grades off the bat. I have problems with this. You know, you see it all the time, but it really affects people long term. That's all I had to say.
Thank you, Tim. Of course. And NAAA, so you know that the NAACP, the NAACP was pushed to do the desegregation. What they recognize is they desegregated the kids, but they didn't desegregate the teachers. So if they had desegregated the teachers, that would
that's exactly what it was my firm belief, you know, it really affected and messed up people so that when I was trying to get interviews with certain people who have been, they couldn't go back and talk about this stuff.
No. I mean, you look at Hidden Figures, for example, in the movie, which is like 50 years too late, and you can see that they were in a nurturing environment where they learned math together and they didn't experience stereotype threat. It was communal. It was wonderful, and so, yeah, by desegregating, that was lost. And then the teachers didn't move either. And so then what it reified, and 85% of teachers still in the United States are white, right? And in California, that's a big problem when 65% of the students are Latino, right? Yeah. So we've got to rectify this sort of situation. But anyway, the bystander information, and this is what my students do to me when they see me like stressed out. They're like, Leti, you got this. You got this. And as soon as they tell me, you got this, I got this. So yeah, that's a mic. And then in institutional affirmation, does anyone have an idea for an institutional affirmation? Something they could have done to prevent this sort of situation? That's a hard one, huh? So in the interest of time, because I did share with folks, my 27-year-old needs to go get he had an MRI and I need to go take him to get a shot. So I have to leave right at 12. I think the kinds of things that could happen is that facilitators of meetings, program officers at the NIH, I mean, we're all doing training. I think that if there's a policy about, actually putting at the, we're unapologetically inclusive, we celebrate everyone, a lot of this ambient signaling, making sure that the panels, it's not just all, women, all men and one woman. I mean, these are things that folks don't like to have, those kinds of rules. I mean, I was totally benefited by affirmative action. I know that the reason I got into Stanford was affirmative action. I know that the reason I got into Berkeley was affirmative action. I know that the reason I was hired at San Francisco State, despite coming from Berkeley and Stanford and having 5 papers, was because of affirmative action, right? So those kinds of policies are needed in order to repair the problems that we've had. Okay, so, what I'll do now in the last few minutes is share something. I'm very excited by the fact that I have an opinion piece coming out in Patterns. Patterns is a new journal that from Cell Publications, the Cell Press, and this is a figure from that. So it's coming out on March 3rd, if anybody's interested. And the title of the paper or the opinion is Anti-Deficit is Anti-Racist and Transformative. And so I will just share the origin of this figure. I was told, so you're looking at this figure, but just listen in terms of a little bit different. So I was told by somebody, the reason that you don't fit in science is because science is like this white square right here, and you're a circle and you don't fit. And I said, oh, no. Science is like this 3/4 full square, and I'm the square, I'm the square that's missing. Me and others like me, we're just missing, and once we get in, we're going to make science all good. Okay, so that's where this started. But as I was thinking about my own trajectory and my own experiences, is I very much experienced the deficit-based model, where there's science, I'm the little circle, and the attempt was to really fade my stripes and make me into a square. I resisted. I've always resisted. That's just me. But other folks, it's really hard. And then that's non-transformative. Science is the same before and after, right? Now, if you have micro affirmations where you really celebrate the unique stripes of individuals, the languages they speak, the approaches that they bring to science. I was told that you do science differently. And I'm like, how do I do science? And I'm like, well, you always want to work in a team and be collaborative and like nice to each other. I'm like, well, yeah, when I was at Berkeley, it was like, we're going to get this problem and we're going to like, boots to the ground. And that was not my culture. So that's fine for those individuals, but microaffirmations affirming that, oh yeah, you're collaborative, you're communal, you share results, that heightens the stripes. And then when it integrates to the rest of the square, you have transformation. Okay, so I think we really want to make sure that we are affirming individuals' differences and unapologetically celebrating those differences, because the woman on the panel that was pregnant is going to likely be a better and more authentic role model for other women who want to go into science and be mothers, right? So that we need to lift that up. Okay, so the BUILD project is funded by the NIH Common Fund. These are the references that I've used, and we're right at noon. And so I'm sorry I didn't leave any time for questions because I hear my son outside. But Rochelle, is it okay if folks, if they have any questions? Well, okay, just send me an email.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Rochelle, go ahead.
Okay.
Yes, we'd be happy to send you questions outside of the presentation as well. Dr. Magaña, this was an outstanding presentation, and we really appreciate your time here. Thank you again.
Yeah.
We look forward to continued working with you.
Yeah. Celebrate your stripes.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.